Hello, welcome. Today we are going to give a brief introduction of dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, DNS short. This is a really important both theoretical concept and method that really enhances and complements all exercise and movement that you do. Really is something that I think there's not enough attention brought to. When we think of exercise, we often think of muscles, strength training, and flexibility of those muscles. Or we think of, aerobic or cardiovascular exercises like running, walking, biking, swimming. But DNS falls into a third category known as neuromotor exercise. Which directly challenges the nervous system and the patterns of movement and the coordination of those patterns. DNS specifically focuses on a system known as the Integrated Spinal Stabilizing System, or ISSS. And this system involves the deep neck flexors, muscles that kind of retract your head back, the diaphragm, which rests below the rib cage, the transverse abdominis, also known as the corset muscle, which rests below all of the superficial abdominal muscles, kind of encompasses this lower region, and the pelvic floor muscles, which of course rest in your pelvis. These muscles all are supposed to work as a system to provide stability to your movement, really to form a stable foundation around your center and really stabilizing the whole trunk. If you think of the trunk as your torso as the foundation, the foundation needs to be solid for your arms and legs to efficiently move. And so the more stable that foundation is, the better your movement quality is. The more efficient, the more optimal that movement quality is. So DNS specifically was, like I said, is both theory and method that's been in development really over the last 70 years. It was back in the early 50s that researchers started looking at developmental kinesiology, which is kinesiology of the movement of how we develop our movements, and that is often through the study of children and babies, toddlers, and they noticed that there is very specific baselines of movement most people are aware of, rolling over, crawling, sitting up, standing, walking, right? These are all baselines parents are looking for. But developmental kinesiologists look at that and study the progression and what it means if certain baselines aren't met. And ultimately, this research also was implemented in average populations. How well an adult, for instance, could do certain movements, developmental type movements, often showed how well that system of muscles was working, and how well their movement quality would ultimately be. DNS systemizes, looks at each of these movement baselines and gives kind of a goal, a way to practice them and implement them, while implementing the ISSS. And so that's the most important thing with DNS. There are many other movements that we can do. There's a whole flow sequence that ultimately you can learn, which kind of goes through these different stages and how they flow from one to the other. But all of that really can't work or can't be very effective if the ISSS is not working properly. So there's a lot of ways you can test this. We're going to go through the seated way. right now I'm just seated on the ground, but the most basic level would actually be to start in a chair. Ideally a higher chair than this, one in which you can't necessarily get stability of your from your feet. So something elevated like a stool would be better. Also one that you're not going to be using the back of the chair. So for this, I'm going to actually elevate my legs a little bit. I'm not going to rest them down. And I'll scoot a little closer. All right, and I'll bring my shirt out here. So one of the first things that you can do just to see how your ISSS is working is place your hands actually first over the lower abdomen below the navel, kind of toward the groin, where your pelvis is. Try to lift the feet. Ideally, you wouldn't be straining this much to lift the feet, but if you can have a higher chair, that'd be ideal. And not sitting back against the chair. Keep the torso up on your own. And then just see how you're breathing. Evaluate how you breathe. Some people are chest breathers. You may feel expansion up here in the chest or in the ribs, maybe more in the middle. See if there's any movement though in the lower abdomen. And if there is, see how low that pressure goes. Generally, with each inhalation, you will feel pressure in the develop as your torso expands. And as you exhale, just notice what happens. Some people, when you exhale, it deflates quite a bit. It's kind of inhalation and exhalation. Let's see what happens. Ideally, our breath, the pressure that we create, we should be able to create pressure all the way down into the pelvis. And when you exhale, you shouldn't totally lose that pressure. It shouldn't totally deflate. There should always, whether you're inhaling or exhaling, be some pressure. And it's kind of springy, kind of like a trampoline almost, ideally. If you're not like that, that's okay. But the goal ultimately for this, and to kind of the check mark, the baseline to look for when you're practicing DNS is, can you get your breath to that point, nice and low, expand, and are you able to maintain some of that pressure? And if you go back to the foundation concept, if the foundation is strong in one moment, and very stable, but then, when you exhale, it totally, it loses all that pressure, then the foundation becomes weak again. Ideally, you should always have some pressure created with those muscles. This doesn't mean you're holding your breath, and neither are you trying to flex. We're not flexing our abdominal muscles when we do this. We're just breathing. So it's much deeper than that. In fact, if you are bracing, if you're tightening those abdominal muscles, that is a compensation pattern for sometimes a weak, deep core. Ideally, all the pressure though that you create is through just nice low breathing and using the fingers to direct that breath. So once you're there, if maybe you have a few moments, if you're able to get some pressure there, then the next area would be to bring your hands around the sides. So around the sides like this. Again, you can have some of your fingers wrapped kind of toward that lower abdomen, toward the groin. Your thumb, try to wrap it toward your lower back. And we're above the hip bone. So don't be resting on the bone because then you're not really feeling much. Make sure you're resting right above it, kind of between the rib cage, which is here, between the hip bone, which is here. So it's not a whole lot of space, but it's that squishy part of the stomach or the abdomen that we're trying to place our hands. And then you're focusing on nice expansion as you inhale. And the same concept, when you exhale, try not to lose some of that pressure that you create when you inhale. Still breathe fully, but focus on maintaining pressure. And it's pressure not just in the front, but in the sides and even in the lower back. And so this concept of breathing, I'll go ahead and relax my hands. You should be able to breathe in a 360-degree radius. I like to think like there's a ball resting sort of in the pelvis, and the top of the ball is like the bottom of my rib cage here, and the bottom of the ball is like right in the pelvis. And as I inhale, it kind of expands in all directions, and exhale, it might lose a little pressure, but it doesn't totally deflate. It stays full. It's filling that area. Now, one other area I forgot to mention, but it's important. We also mentioned those deep neck flexors. So when we are doing any kind of breathing exercise for DNS, we don't want to be in a weird posture, hunched posture, and we don't want to be in like a military posture. We want to be in a very neutral position. So the crown of the head should be elevated. Don't let your head come forward. Tuck it back gently, elevating the crown. The rib cage also should be relaxed and resting right over the pelvis. We don't want to be flaring our rib cage. We want the rib cage to be in a neutral position while at the same time tucking the head back gently. Shouldn't be straining anything, but just think of those as general guidelines where they generally should be. And then breathing and maintaining. Once you've got that feeling, you can plant the feet if you'd like. Just try to maintain that breath. Very good. All right. So we're going to do one more position here. So this was seated, but ultimately DNS is really important to practice on the ground with different movements. Obviously, a baby, as all of us were at one point, starts off on the ground and it has to learn to, navigate the environment from the ground. That's where a lot of our early neuro connections are made. That connection just lying on the ground, there's a lot more feedback of your body and space given. And this is important, just as it was when we were babies learning to move. It's just as important when we're adults to practice that, to keep our nervous system happy. So go ahead, leave my stuff here, and we're going to lay on the ground carefully in whatever way is comfortable for you. Try not to strain or anything. And we'll lay back. We're going to plant our feet on the sides. Try to let the lower back just naturally flatten against the mat. Part of the reason why we have our feet up like this is to keep that lower back flat and neutral. If we had our legs straight, what tends to happen is we arch our back like this. So get it nice and neutral, comfortable. And then from this point, just see how you can breathe. See how you're breathing right now. Typically in this position, it's a lot easier to feel the abdomen expand. But again, have that direction down toward the lower abdomen, down toward the pelvis, the groin, and try to get some pressure there. And just as important, once you can create that pressure, try to maintain some of it. Try not to let it totally deflate down. Make sure you expand and you exhale and you still have some fullness. All right, so this is a really good way, like I said, to practice that nice lower abdominal breathing. Now we're going to do one final exercise, and that is what's known as the 6-month position. So maintaining our breath here, we're going to carefully lift up one leg and let that knee be a little wider than 90 degrees. The hip can be a little less than 90 degrees. Open the knee so that the foot is a little more inward, the knee is a little more out. And then gently lift the other leg. And just try to maintain your breath low. And ultimately, if you do this correctly, which is hard to do the first time, even the second or third, but eventually with practice, you can do this
and hold your legs up indefinitely by maintaining a good ISSS, by maintaining good pressure in the lower abdomen, and the muscles of your quads shouldn't fire as much. But if this is your first time, likely you'll be feeling some hip flexor, and quad activation as your body tries to muscle its way there. But do your best to relax. All right, and then carefully we'll set this leg down, down. Allow that breath to be relaxed here. And then we'll get back up. Now, a nice way to get up is with what it's called the log roll technique. So just look to the side, bring your arm up, and gently roll to the side, all in one unit. Then you can use your hand to help come up and push through this forearm as well. I didn't see that on the camera. And then bring yourself up sideways. And then, getting up. There's a number of ways to do it. If you need a chair or some support to get up, have something a little higher. Bring one leg up. Bring your both hands on the chair and come up nice and tall. So thank you very much. That was just a short introduction of DNS and a little overview of DNS breathing, which is activating the ISSS, that integrated spinal stabilizing system. Really important, those deep core muscles. So hope you have a great one. Hope this helps with your movement practice, and we'll see you next time.